We are doing Torah Yud Zion with Mordecai Holtz. We send love to the Sakar family for hosting and Charles specifically for making sure that we went ahead. Zevi for making sure we got food.
Yep. Zera Shimshon, this will be
Weiss as well. Always.
Zera Shimshon, this will be a refuah shlema for Charles's grandmother, Nazal Bat Ruth.
Zal Bat Ruth refuah shlema.
And hatzlacha for all the chayalim.
Amen. Yep. In Khan Yunis, crazy times right now.
All right, we're going to do the last one. The last one is short, but it's kind of cool. We'll start with this one, just because I thought it's a nice way to start. Yud Zion, the last one. It's got. All right, tell me when you're ready. Page. If you're in the English, it's page 424.
424. I'm following you, so I'm looking for it.
So last one in Parshat Vayera.
Oh, okay.
It's got a little box in the middle there.
Yeah.
Not Vayera with an olive. Is it there? You got it? There we go. That's it.
Oh, you weren't kidding.
Okay. So an interesting, there's a lot of this week's Parsha Vayera is 7 of the Makot appear in this week's Parsha. And there are so many different ways to interpret the Makot. So of course, Zera Shimshon has a couple of ways to do it. One of them is an interesting way he identifies Yud Zayin, page, I don't know what daf that is. Okay, so so this is one way to do it, is he notices that there are 3 Makot. Yes, the last one. It's a very short one. We're starting with the short one just to get ourselves a little into things. And for those people who may want to leave a little early.
Prime the pump.
Exactly, prime the pump. So the question is, he notices, the Zera Shimshon notices, and there's a lot of things that you can notice when you look at the 10 Makot together. You notice there's a lot of similarities between them, and there's also a lot of differences between them, and there's also a lot of common themes among them. So the Zera Shimshon picks up an interesting component based on, he quotes Al Pi Kabbalah, but it's not necessarily only Kabbalah. Anyway, so he says like this. The question is, Yesh latet ta'am. We have to give a reason. Lama b'makata kinim, hashchin v'achoshech. Why in the makab kinim, shchin, and choshech lo matzinu bahem hatra'al el paro kodam ha'makah k'mor b'chol hashar makot. When looking at the different psukim, there's 3 makot that Moshe doesn't give any warning beforehand, and those are kinim, the lice, shchin, boils, and choshech, darkness. And he says,
Choshech next week.
Choshech next week, but like I said, he views it as, even though Choshech is next week officially in the parsha, he views it as one set. Again, you're looking at 10 makot, so they were just like he bunches them all together, and 2 out of the 3 makot that he just mentioned are in this week's parsha anyway, so he kind of brings it together. So he says, Sefer HaPliyah is a Kabbalistic work. I'm just quoting what it says here in an article, a Kabbalistic work attributed by some to Rav Avigdor Kara of Prague. It also appears somewhere else as well, but either which way he says, Shalosh Makot hayu b'shamshot b'yachad im kinim, shchin v'choshech. V'chol makah shimsha achat shimsho shtayim acheret ima. So he says basically this Sefer HaPliyah, which is quoted in the Yalkut Reuveni, he says that there are 3 makot, these 3 makot, kinim, choshech, and shchin, all worked together. Whenever one of the makot, the other 2 served as basically what he calls in our art school, they call it as auxiliaries, basically support, the support staff. Every one of them, there's an allusion to the connection between these 3 makot in each of the 3 Hebrew words: kinam, shchin, and choshech. If you look at the way he sets it up in every one of the books, it's pretty much the same. But kinam, shchin, and choshech, you can see that if you look at it top down or cross, they all, right? If you look across, kinim written across, and then you look up down like a crossword puzzle, right? Top down, you can see that choshech, shchin, and kinam are all written together, right? If you look at all 3 letters, they're all mixed up, but they all work together, right? Isn't it fascinating? It's fascinating. Anyway, so he says here, he says Moshe couldn't, based on this, he says Moshe could not have warned Paro on one of these makot by itself without mentioning the other 2, because basically they all need each other, right? He says because the other 2 makot were served together with it. Cool. Yeah, it is cool, right? God forbid, had Moshe warned him about the makav choshech or shchin or kinim individually, he would have said is he would have said, I'm about to bring Choshech, right? But he really meant to say, I'm about to bring one, which is really three. So he didn't want to, God forbid, Hashem didn't want to view Moshe, or didn't want Moshe to be viewed as, God forbid, a liar. We're in Torah Yud Zayin, which is the last one of Parshat Vayera, and it's just a very quick one, just to kind of like as I've said, prime the pump, right? So it's a quick one as to why Choshech, Kinim, and Shechin don't have warnings. So if you look at the way he sets it up, it's based on the Yalkut Ravini, and he says basically like this. Then therefore, he couldn't also do is he couldn't possibly warn Paro on all three makot, meaning saying is Shechin is coming, but Kinim and Choshech are also coming at the same time. Because each one had its own specific time. So he says the Zera Shimshon, a very simple quote unquote, understanding of what's going on in these three makot, the three makot that don't have any warning. He says that based on the fact that if you just line them up, Kinim, Shechin, and Choshech, one on top of another, you'll see that each one of them, basically, you can create the other ones based on the way that you line them up in this way. Yes, sir.
But if he only gave an indication of each plague on its own, Paro would never know the other two and make the connection.
Until the third time around.
Right. Exactly. And at that point, fine. But
so that, I think what he's trying to say is it's more of like just like a I think he's saying I think what he's trying to say is, yes, you're right. Paro could not have, understood the fact that one means three, right? Meaning one equals three, which is what he's trying to say here. But I think again, my understanding of the Zera Shimshon is very limited, but I think he's trying to say is that there has to be a reason, a connection between, or not connection, but it has to be a reason as to why these are the only three makot that don't have warning. And therefore he says is, I have to think about answers. So he says, well, one of the reasons that I think of based on this, work of Kabbalah work, he says is that if you just line them up, he just says is that it can't be by chance that Shechin, Choshech, and Kinim, or Kinam, as he calls it, line them up and they all work out that they create each other's words. So I think it's less about the fact that Paro, and also you didn't want Moshe, God forbid, to be called a liar by saying is one, which equals three, right? He wouldn't want to say that, or he's saying all three came. Right? I think what he's trying to say is really more about the idea of that it's just an interesting association between these three makot that don't have any warning. That's really all of it, to my understanding. I'm sure that the Zera Shimshon himself would probably say something a little deeper than that, but
at this point, did Hashem harden his heart at this point?
Yes, he did. He hardened himself.
So
he hardened his heart after each one, but what he didn't do is Moshe didn't warn Paro about these three makot specifically. The other ones he said, you're about to get blood, you're about to get.
He done tshuva anyway because Hashem hardened
Correct,
his heart.
correct. That's a famous question in and of itself.
He didn't want to.
It's actually an interesting observation. Zera Shimshon brings down, he singularizes the
Kinim, right?
So there's only one word. There's only one word in the Torah in Chamishi in Pasuk Yud Daled.
That says Kinim, right?
It says Kinam.
Kinam, right? Yeah.
There's only one. Otherwise,
This is
Kinim is
Kinim.
plural
With the Yud?
with the Yud. Kinim,
Interesting.
No. The Kinim is two Yuds, right? Well, with one Yud. Sorry.
One Yud, right?
And then there's another time where it's done with two Yuds, but then there's only one place where you say the Kinam where you write it down.
Right. So that is an interesting point. So that's why it's obviously singular. So let's do okay. So that was the first one, just to get ourselves a little bit into things a little bit, and also to help Zev kind of go through things.
3 hours here.
I understand. I got it. Okay. Let's do. Let's see here. I had a few that I would like to do. Okay, let's do this one. Chet, number 8. Jerush 8.
We're going backward.
We're going backwards. I know we're going out of order, but the first one was like a little bit like more like a. You always want to start with like an easy one that's a little bit more cute, kind of get people into things.
This is
Chet 8. So we'll start with number 8. We're not going to stop the recording because that first one was a little short. Let's just see here. And why do they do it in numerals? Okay, here we go. So this question is, it's a very good question, a very simple one. There's let's ask. We'll start with the Midrash. The Midrash says that a person, we know the famous the Makat Dam in it's Torah Chet 8. So the Midrash tells us that during the Makkah of Dam, which is the first Makkah, right? If a Jewish person had a barrel of water and the Egyptian would attempt to draw the water from the barrel, what would happen? It would turn to blood, right? Even if a Jewish person and an Egyptian would drink from the same bowl, the Jewish person would drink water, and the Egyptian would drink blood. The only way the Egyptian would be able to drink water was through purchasing the water from the Jewish person. As a result, what happens? The Jewish people have all of a sudden money. Okay, so that's the question, right? So now, if you look here, Midrash Rabbah, Hadaga Asher Bayor. Hadaga Asher Bayor Meta. Right? That's the pasuk is that it's in Shmot. The pasuk is in Shmot, Perek Tet, pasuk Tet. The Daga, the fish that are in the Yaor Meta, meaning it's dead, dies. Right? Amar B'Chanina. Mimakat dam ha'eshiru Yisrael shayu mochrim ma'im lemitzrayim makshima olam ma'inyan drasha zo pasuk zeh dafka v'echi remiza. So he says is the Midrash says that the Jewish people became rich or became wealthy from Makat Dam, right? Because they would sell water to the Egyptians. Okay. Now the question is, every person Zera Shimshon asks, the Midrash is talking about the fact that the Jews made money out of the bloody water, right? Because they were able to monetize it. Okay, great. Now the question is, what is the pasuk that says Vadagasher Bayor Meta? How does that infer or imply that that the Midrash? What is the association between the Midrash or relationship between the Midrash saying that they made money from it to the pasuk that says that the fish died? Right. That's the question. Right? How is it? The question is, what does the narrative meaning? What is the Midrash? What is the Midrash, which is talking about the fact that the Jews made money out of the fact that they were selling the water, the clear water that they had, to the Egyptians, so that way they can then, drink water as opposed to drinking blood, right? How is that Midrash understood, or how do we understand that Midrash from the pasuk that says that the fish died in the water, in the blood? That's what he's asking. It's a very simple question. Nothing, nothing very large or very impressive. Right, the fact that the fish died, we derive that the Jewish people became wealthy. So how do we?
Why did the Jewish people need to become wealthy if they were going to become wealthy?
He's going to answer that question as well. He's going to answer this question as well. Great, good question. Right. So it says here, Yesh lomar, shadavar yadua shebimidah she'adam oded ba modedim lo. Right. The person is that we know that there's a concept. This is actually based in Mishnah in Sotah. It says that it says that a person is treated by Hashem in the same way that he himself acts, right? So the more, that's one of the famous, right? So if you are compassionate, so Hashem will also show compassion to you. God forbid if you do the opposite, Hashem will do the opposite to you too. Right? And we find that the Jewish people allowed the Egyptians allowed the Jewish people to catch their own fish. So he makes a very interesting observation. Later on in Sefer Bamidbar, we see that Bnei Israel complain about their food, right, or the lack of regular food. They always complain about the fact that they only have man, and it says the word Zacharnu et hadaga asher nochal b'mitzrayim chinam. Do we ever remember in the story of the slavery of Egypt that we ever see that Bnei Israel actually had fish for free? No. So what the Zera Shimshon seems to imply, based on he says that he basically implies that that the Egyptians would let the Bnei Israel fish in the water, in the Nile, for free. Meaning, if you want to go get your own food, go do it. It's all yours, no cost. That's why the pasuk says we remember the fish that we ate for free. Right? And for this reason alone of treating the Egyptians, the fish should not have died, right? Because for this reason alone of treating the Egyptians, the fish should not have died. Right? Or more so, it would have been a great loss. Israel, it would have been a great loss for Bnei Israel if the fish actually died, right? They would no longer have access to fish that they could eat for free. And if the absence of fish that they wanted to eat other foods, they would have to go out and pay for their own food. Thus, there's a difficulty with the verse, right? It shouldn't have died. Why should the fish died? Because if the fish died, Bnei Israel would not have food to eat for free. So that's the question. He's really asking. He's saying is what the pasuk itself is problematic based on the future pasuk that's read that's written in Bamidbar that says we ate for fish for free, right? If we understand that the Mitzrayim actually let Bnei Israel eat for free the fish, right? So then, God forbid, we should say that the fish died, because if the fish died, that means what? Bnei Israel wouldn't have food to eat for free, and if they had to go get food, what would they have to do? Go out and find it and buy it and sell it and whatever, and therefore it shouldn't have happened to die. The fish shouldn't have died. So therefore, the difficulty with this question, that's why it says Lachein bar Rabbi Chanina v'darash al pasuk zed dafka. That's why Rabbi Chanina comes specifically on this midrash. He brings his midrash specifically on this pasuk, as opposed to any other pasukim of Makatam. Shmakatam hashiru Yisrael v'im kein lo hayu tzrichim od la'achol adagim b'chinam shorish lahem ma'ot harbe liknot ma shetzrichim. He says this is why. That's why Rabbi Chanina comes specifically on this pasuk and not any other pasukim to tell us that Bnei Israel made money from dam, from this pasuk, from this one specifically, so that if they needed any other food, became lo hayu tzrichim od la'achol, they didn't even the food. It says that the fish died, and we just asked the question: how could it be the fish died if the fish dying would mean that Bnei Israel would no longer have free food? So he says no. That's why Rabbi Chanina comes into the midrash and says it's not that yes, the fish died. And that's why through the makkah itself, meaning through the actual makkah, even though, yes, they used to have free fish, now they says, how did they make money now? Now that they used to have free fish, now they need to make money. How did they make money? They made money by selling the water that for them was water and to the Egyptians was blood. That's his first answer. His first answer, I think, is...
In a way, it also connects kind of well with manna because they got sick of just the manna.
Right.
Same thing. You get sick of just fish.
Right.
But now you don't no longer need just fish. Now
Exactly.
you can buy whatever you want.
Exactly.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So they had all this money, but with the other plagues, there were no animals.
We're going to get to
Where were they
another
buying?
midrash later. We're going to ask a question as to about why the animals, which specific animals, and things like that. But yes, it's a good question. What are they going to buy, right? And what Egyptian is going to actually sell to these Bnei Israel?
And the other question I have is what currency did they use to buy?
So that first of all,
If it was Egyptian currency, what use would it be after they leave Egypt?
right? So
Which
money
was
is
within
money,
the year?
right? So money is money. So usually, on the olden days, it wasn't the dollar. It wasn't a currency.
Gold.
It was gold or silver, whatever it was. So that's the first thing. So gold and silver is usable anywhere. That's the first thing. And second thing is where the Egyptians going to sell them, we don't know. But the truth is that Bnei Israel lived in Goshen. They didn't live in Mitzrayim itself. They worked in Mitzrayim. I mean, they were enslaved in Mitzrayim, but they lived in Goshen. And the assumption is that they had their own kind of society and shopping and whatever. That's the assumption. I'm not just making that assumption now. That's an assumption that makes sense outside of this context. Let's say we can explain another question. Let's say there's no difficulty at all. That's about the fact that the fish died. So he says let's give it another explanation. So he says here, based on what's that?
Is that what?
Yeah, he left. He had to go out. He was didn't have enough. He said he didn't sleep a lot, so he left early. He just wanted to do a short one, so I started with the end, even though I probably should have ended with the end. But anyway, so he says, go back to the pasuk that we mentioned about in Bamidbar. It says that we remember eating the fish for free in Egypt, in Mitzrayim. It doesn't mean that they actually eat fish, meaning for free, as we would read it as the shot of the pasuk, right? As it says, elachinam below mitzvot. This is a nice little piece. So he says, it's not that they literally ate it for free, meaning at no cost, meaning that they ate it. V'chinam means that they didn't have any mitzvot, right? V'chinam and mitzvot, they were free of mitzvot. So he says here, mishum hachi metu adagim. According to interpretation, the Jewish people, in fact, did not eat the fish for free, and for this reason, it was understood that the fish died. Shamitzrim lo haya lahem bahem shum zchut. The Egyptians had no merit to save the fish. Shelo natnim otam l'Yisrael b'chinam, since they did not give the Jewish people the fish for free. So the Jewish people did not lose anything through the death of the fish, since they had no way they had to pay for them in any event. So how then does the Midrash infer, right? And the question is, how does the Midrash infer that the Bnei Israel became wealthy through the makkah of blood? So he says, no one was asking about the simple meaning. Why is it necessary at all to tell us that the fish died? Right? It's obvious. Right? We know that the fish can only live in water.
It's so obvious because when the Jews drank the water, it was clear.
Very good. ועכשיו, he's about to say something very similar to that. ועכשיו שנהפכו המים לדם, בוודאי שיש להם לדם. Of course, if the fact that if everything turned to blood, turned to blood, then it's obvious that the fish are going to die. It's not like no one would be surprised if you didn't leave out the fact that it says the fish died, because the obvious answer is, of course they died. It's all blood, right? Fish need water. There's no water. Fish dead. That's it. Like, what are we saying? So he says, if so he says, maybe perhaps we should say that even though the water changed to blood, it was not really blood. What does that mean? Really, it was still water. But what the Egyptians would draw out, it would look like blood, right? But that which the Jewish people would draw out was actually water. So the difference, like we said, we know that the Midrash we know that whatever the Jew touched was water, whatever the Egyptian touched was blood. So he's saying it wasn't actual blood; it just looked like blood. Yeah, exactly right. Food coloring, exactly.
Okay.
Right. Right. Hold on. So if this was the case, the fish would also been able to survive, which would have been proper since they were the food of the Jewish people, right? So therefore, with regard to the fish, which was the food of the Jewish people, there was no reason for the water to change to blood. So therefore, the fish could have survived. And therefore, he's basically saying is that is, had the water essentially stayed water but turned into blood when it was drawn by the Egyptians would have been able to drink water drawn by a Jew without paying for it. But now that the water was essentially transformed into blood, it would turn back into water only for the benefit of the Jew. Basically, what he's saying is that there are two approaches. One approach is that that the fish did actually die. The fact that the fish did die indicates the Jewish people must have become wealthy, and therefore they were not affected by the loss of their free fish, but rather what happened is the water that they sold allowed them to become wealthy, and therefore what happened, that's the reason why the Midrash specifically is on this pasuk as opposed to any other pasuk. That's one option. The other one is would not cause a loss to those people because in fact they did not. In fact, is that he says here that it was only for a Jew that the blood miraculously turned back into water. Hashem brought the plague into this manner to force Egyptians to purchase their water from the Jewish people. That is, the river actually turned into blood if the Egyptian would take a Jewish person's water. Okay, so basically he's saying tells us that the Jewish people became wealthy through selling the water to the Egyptians, meaning that yes, the fish actually died, but what happened is that the Egyptian saw the water and he thought it was blood. Even when he took it out, he looked like blood. But when the Jewish person saw it and took it out, it was water. And therefore the fish survived. Why did the fish survive? The fish survived because it was actually water. It never actually turned into blood.
No one looks at it.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
So you think, I'm being very
Cynical?
You don't think that there was one Egyptian guy who drank what looked like blood and said, "Oh, it's just red, but it's water"?
I don't know. I don't like to go too much into the deeper fake news. You're right, fake news. All right, so
you know what the wealthiest country in the world is? Believe it or not,
Qatar, Egypt,
Canada.
Yeah,
They have over 800,000 lakes of fresh water, which is more than the entire rest of the world combined.
Wow.
Okay, so let's do. Oh,
Should we do a new recording?
yeah. We'll stop in a second. Yeah, we'll stop this one, and then
We're going to do a new Torah. Everyone join.
in a second. I'm just gonna grab some food. Then I'm going to find one more, which is a little bit longer. Just find it. A lot of